Hello and welcome to my channel if you're new here, and welcome back if you've been here before. In a previous video, I talked about how I was going to be doing some cooking videos. Like some of my previous videos, this is going to be a review video, but of a different kind of book. I've been loving some of the recipes out of this book, and I'm using it not just for the fact that it's keto, because some of the recipes in there are fantastic whether you're doing a keto diet or not. Also because I love some of the recipes in it. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. I've actually done quite a few of the recipes in here, and the ones I love the most are the ones I'm going to share with you. So I probably won't do all the recipes in here, but I'll do quite a few of them, and especially my favorites. And the first one that I'm going to share with you is a cabbage and bacon recipe, and that's pretty much it as far as the ingredients. It's a really simple recipe, and you just start out with cabbage that you chop up and bacon, and you cook the bacon first and then you add the cabbage in, and well, let's take a look at how that goes. For the fried bacon and cabbage recipe, what I'm doing is opening up the package of bacon, and I'm just going to take this top part off and get rid of that, and then I'm pulling out the individual pieces of bacon and laying them down in the pan. But as I went along, I discovered it's really difficult to separate out bacon with just one hand. So I got out what I needed from the pack pretty much, and then I went back and used both hands to separate out each piece. As you can see here, it's a pain to try and separate pieces of bacon with just one hand. Now the next step is the cabbage. So while the bacon's cooking, you want to peel off any dead leaves from the cabbage, rinse it under the water, and then I usually cut it in half, and I take each half and I chop them up. Sometimes I use a full head of cabbage, sometimes I won't. It depends on the size of the head of the cabbage, but I'll cut it in half first, and then I'll usually go back and take each half and I'll chop it up into smaller pieces to put into the bacon, because you don't really want huge chunks, but you don't want minced either. So cut down to good slices. As you can see here, I've cut it in half, and now I'm cutting slices off that half, and I'll go back and stack those and chop those into smaller pieces. Now back to the bacon. You don't want the bacon to burn, and I'm cooking this in a cast iron pan because I learned that that's one of the most delicious ways to make bacon. So I go over there and flip that periodically. Since I've got the cabbage pretty much all chopped up now, I can pay more attention to the bacon. So you just flip that a few times, making sure that's cooking evenly, and then back over to the cabbage and cutting up the second portion of the one half of the head of cabbage. Now that I have most of the cabbage chopped up, at least of what I'm going to use, and the bacon is pretty well done, I'm putting a paper towel on a plate so that way I can go back over to the bacon and then take off the pieces as they're ready and put them on the paper towel to absorb some of the grease from the bacon. And most of the pieces were done, so I was just flipping them to see if any needed extra cooking on one side or the other, and then after the few seconds of them cooking, then I'm putting them onto the paper towel, because I found that bacon, well, it could be really pretty well done on one side, it might need a little bit more cooking on the other side, and that other side sometimes only takes seconds. So I'm making sure to like flip and rotate before transferring any of them to the paper towel. Now that the bacon is all cooked, it's time to put the cabbage over into the pan. As you see, a little piece didn't quite make it into the pan, but no big deal because there was plenty of cabbage. But I get all the cabbage into the pan and mix that around, and it'll start to cook in the bacon grease, which is part of what adds the flavor to it. Now at the end you will salt and pepper this, but in the meantime you get a lot of the flavor in the cabbage being cooked from the bacon grease. After it's been cooking for a little while, I switched from stirring the cabbage with the metal tongs to a stainless steel spatula because it's just easier to move the cabbage around that way. For the bacon, it was easier to move it with the tongs, but the cabbage is easier to move with the spatula. So I'm just stirring that around, and then I let it just sort of sit and rest and cook. So I'll speed this up again so you don't have to sit and just watch it cook, because that by itself would be pretty boring. Now, one of the modifications you can make to this recipe is adding onions, which the last time I made it, my husband had commented that he would like to try some onions in it. So I chopped one up and threw it in, and since he liked it so much, I decided to do that again here. So I just chopped up a small onion and put that into the mix. Another modification you can do is egg noodles. Now, if you add egg noodles, it's not going to be a keto recipe anymore, but still delicious. And I have made that modification before for my husband, where I boiled a pot of egg noodles, and then as it got towards the end of the cooking process where the cabbage and the onions were kind of tender, I threw the noodles in before I put the bacon in. While the cabbage and the onions are cooking, this is the point where I transfer the bacon over to the cutting mat, and I start chopping it up so I can transfer it back to the cabbage, because you don't want to put it back into the pan in the larger chunks because it won't evenly disperse. So I just chop up the bacon into bite-sized pieces on the cooking mat before I transfer them back into the pan. Now that all the bacon is chopped, it's time to put it back into the pan with the cabbage and the onion that I chopped up. And once I scoop all that over into the pan and get all the pieces of bacon chopped up, I'll stir that around so that the bacon can mix up with the cabbage and the onion. This will also get the bacon warmed back up so that it'll be the same temperature as the cabbage and the onion. And that way it'll also be in the pan for when I put the salt and pepper on the whole combination and get it ready to serve. Now that it's cooked a while and everything's combined, I'm going to add the salt and pepper to add that little extra bit of seasoning to it. Once it's all mixed together with the salt and pepper, it's ready to serve. Now the second recipe that I'm doing in this video is a broccoli and cheese soup. And this one is particularly good if, say for instance, you're a traditional Catholic like me and you don't eat meat on Fridays, regardless of whether it's Lent or not. You can also use this one, other days of the week, obviously. And of the items that you can substitute out, for instance, it calls for a vegetable broth. Well, if you're not cooking it on a Friday, for instance, then you could also use chicken broth instead of the vegetable broth as a substitute, and it also calls for heavy whipping cream. Well, when I made this recipe, I had sort of an oops moment where I realized that I didn't have the heavy whipping cream. So I was able to substitute out cream cheese, which works as an excellent substitute, and it tasted fantastic. And my husband actually complimented me on how he loved it and thought it tasted better than usual. Go figure. This is an overview, as you can see, of the items that you'll need. You'll need the broccoli, the broth, the sharp cheddar cheese, onions, garlic. I decided to go with the jarred minced garlic rather than mincing garlic because we didn't have any on hand at the time. There should also be a carton of heavy whipping cream, but like I said, I missed that. So I had cream cheese on hand, which I discovered when I made a previous recipe that cream cheese can actually be substituted for heavy whipping cream. So it actually worked out great. And so the first step here is I'm cutting the onion up because you're going to want to dice an onion. So it's going to be chopped up fairly well, and that will be put into the pot as well as the garlic. And you're also going to have some butter in there because you're going to saute the onion and the garlic as the first step of this recipe. Once you have the onions chopped, you're going to want to put the butter in the pot and start heating that up so that you can saute the onions and the garlic. And you're going to need 3 tablespoons of the butter, as I showed just then. So you'll get the butter, measure out the 3 tablespoons, and cut that into the pot. Once the butter is in there and you have that starting to heat up, you're going to add the onions that you chopped up off of the mat and into the pot. And that way they'll start getting sauteed along with the butter that's melting in the pot. And then after that, you're going to put in the minced garlic. Now the recipe, I believe, calls for 2 or 3 cloves, so I usually take about 2 or 3 teaspoons. I measure that out and put that in, and sometimes I'll even add a little bit more garlic because my husband and I really like garlic. Once you have the onion and the garlic sauteed pretty well, then you're going to switch your attention to the broccoli. So I usually get a big bag of broccoli that's 2 pounds at Sam's Club, and all you need is 1 pound for this recipe. So I usually empty out about half the bag into a strainer and rinse the broccoli because the bag even says that the broccoli hasn't been rinsed yet. So I get that half the bag, rinse the broccoli, and then I dump it into the pot so that I can start cooking. And along with the broccoli, you are also going to be adding the vegetable broth, which my 1 cup measuring cup happened to be dirty at this moment, so I quickly grabbed my 1/4 cup measuring, and I had to pour that several times, obviously, in order to make the 3 cups. So that's what, six trips with that measuring cup in order to get all the vegetable broth into the pot. Once all that's in there, it's just a matter of stepping back and stirring a little bit and letting it simmer for about 10 to 15 minutes. I believe you actually bring it to a boil before the point where you let it simmer, so bring it to a boil, and then after it's boiled, then you turn it down so that it can simmer for a bit, and that'll be about 10 to 15 minutes cooking. While that's cooking is a great time to get the cheese grated, so I always pull out my favorite grater here, and you just grate the cheese until you have about 2 cups, and then some for garnishment. So you'll end up putting 2 cups of cheese into the pot itself, and I like to top my soup with quite a bit of cheese, so I always make sure to grate extra. And it takes a little extra effort to freshly grate it, but it tastes delicious, so it's well worth it. Now that the broccoli is all tender, I'm going to add in the cream cheese that I'm substituting out for the heavy whipping cream, and 1 pack of cream cheese is 8 ounces. So you're going to want to stir the cream cheese around and make sure it gets well integrated in. You wouldn't have this issue with the heavy whipping cream, but the cream cheese does really make an excellent substitute. Once that's all mixed in, you're going to want to put the shredded cheddar cheese in and get that all scraped in, and then you'll stir that around and integrate that into the mix so it'll make it really nice and cheesy tasting. Next, season with salt and pepper, then stir it around and it'll be ready to serve. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that some of these recipes have inspired you to try them out and cook them, and that you'll come back and see my future videos where I do more recipes out of this cookbook. And in the meantime, please remember to subscribe down below and click the little bell so that way YouTube will let you know when I have a new video up, because if you don't click the bell, YouTube tends to not let you know. Also, if you could click like, I'd also appreciate that. It helps out with my channel. And I will see you in the next video.